Testing.
Welcome you guys to another episode of Supernova 25. Are y'all live? Okay. Alright. Okay.
Welcome back to another episode of Supernova 25. I know it's been a while, y'all. Thank y'all for y'all patience, man. I couldn't leave y'all behind like that. Stay tuned for the scoop. It's gonna be a great episode today. My elaborations. The era of the 1960s was a very interesting decade. Here it goes.
Did we just get here? Or was there always an agenda to take over the world through means of oppression? Next, why was JFK, MLK, and Malcolm X suspiciously murdered? And why in the same decade? Next, parenthood is key, but why do they hate it so much? Are they helping us or are they hurting us? Next, the phrase, the Great Society, is something I believe ain't so great. What US president espoused this ideology, and would it make society better or worse? Finally, did we really land on the moon, or was this government's test to see if we would believe them or not for years to come? Remember, TV became popular in the 1960s. Stay tuned for the scoop. The 1960s was a very interesting period of time in our history, to say the least. I know y'all want to know why I say this. I'm a man that seeks the truth to understand why things operate the way they do. The era from 1960 to 1969 was very controversial and very pivotal to how we operate in today's society. Did we just get here? Or was there always an agenda to take over the world through means of oppression? Don't underestimate the poor. They are very important. The reason why is because they are the leverage by which the rich separates themselves and exerts overt power over someone they deem lesser than them. The ransom for a rich man's life is his riches. So therefore, the rich want to get rid of the poor, so that way they will never have to make a decision or option for them. Crazy, right? I sincerely believe that the rich have a mindset to eliminate the obligation to their brothers. In other words, to not be their brother's keeper. This can usually happen through for side charity events and organizations to pump up their status, to look good to society, and for tax write-offs. Let me be real. I know y'all been seeing in the media, man, where, recently, as the time of this recording in 2024, it was an officer, I think his name was Officer Diller in New York, or something like that, and he got murdered in cold blood by repeat criminals that should have been in jail because of their policies are so weak on crime. Then you got these politicians who just want to get a photo op, a video op, and talk at the funeral when the family had refused them to even show up, and they barged their way through. How disrespectful. But let's continue. The era from 1960 to 1969 was so crucial. Believe me, we are still hurting from implementations that was put into action and law from that era. For example, the social safety nets, like Social Security, food stamps, Section 8. People think these things are really helping, but if you dig deep and really critically think, why you ain't going nowhere? Why you always worried? Why you worried about who's gonna be in office? You know what I'm saying? They telling you who to vote for. So before you even get into the elementary school or a polling place, they telling you, they brainwashing you. Time to wake up, people. Why was JFK, MLK, and Malcolm X suspiciously murdered, and why in the same decade? Let's get into this, y'all. President Lyndon B. Johnson, out of respect for his position, was the U.S.'s 36th president. After a little research, he rubbed me as a person who wanted power by any means necessary. Let me explain. He served from 1963, the year of President JFK's assassination, which is only 2.5 years in, until the year of 1969. Immediately after the assassination of our dearly beloved JFK, he declared a war on poverty, quote unquote, urging Congress to pass a law uprooting illiteracy, unemployment, and racial discrimination. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This was highly suspicious to me. The reason was because this was an attempt to gaslight individuals who were the minority group to vote according to fears instead of what was truly right. LBJ's administration implemented a lot of the social safety nets that still exist today, like food stamps, Medicaid, Medicare, and Section 8, for example. These things are viewed as security, but they were designed to keep minorities down and under control. Like I said before, when we come together, finally, there has to be something strategically done to stop it. Why did JFK, MLK, and Malcolm X get murdered suspiciously by almost similar styles of execution? And in the same decade, the common denominator? LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, in my opinion, who stated that he would have the black community voting Democrat for 200 years. Crazy, right? In 1963, Kennedy was moved by the civil rights movement, and so much away that he worked to get legislation passed to create equality for all Americans. MLK was active in the political arena, and by 1967, he considered running for presidential office. And Malcolm X was making headway in the black community in 1964 and 1965. What do these three men have in common? They were all eliminated execution style. It's safe to say LBJ was sniper friendly, keeping it quiet and undercover, in my opinion. MLK was assassinated 5 days later after the announcement of LBJ's retirement from public office. JFK was assassinated 3 months later after he endorsed the March on Washington in 1963, while Malcolm X was assassinated in February of 1965, 6 months before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed into law by LBJ. It seemed like leaders that could overtake LBJ were silenced. Next bullet point. Parenthood is key, but why do they hate it so much? Are they helping us or are they hurting us? To cripple any society, take the father out of it. And that's what so-called government assistance did. That's why they got so many women screaming, "I don't need a man." Trust me, that child desperately does. The way things are looking, that is surely hurting us. And I can explain how. Not just the social safety nets and the change of mind frame, but also the pill, quote unquote, was pioneered by a lady named Margaret Sanger. She was considered a champion of women's reproductive rights. Sanger believed that eugenics, quote unquote, which is a scientific and philosophical term that meant that undesirable populations could be reduced or eliminated by controlling their breeding. Minorities, those living in poverty and those with mental and physical disabilities, were to be eliminated from society. She worked closely with Dr. Gregory Pincus to develop birth control in secret, using Puerto Rican women as guinea pigs for this experiment. I bet you heard of Procter & Gamble, you know, that family company, which is popular, like your consumer cyclicals. American eugenicist Clarence Gamble funded and ran many birth control clinics. Gamble believed that those living in poverty should be wiped out to make room for more suitable members of the population. If you never heard of Enovid, quote unquote, which is ENOVID, it was one of the original birth control pills that was approved in 1957. Margaret Sanger was highly influential in the founding of Planned Parenthood. It sounds like they trying to ban Parenthood, not Planned Parenthood, if you ask me. So in my opinion, they really hurting us, man. Do your research. Comment, let me know what you think. The phrase, the Great Society, is something I believe ain't so great. What US president espoused this ideology, and did it make society better or worse? The president who implemented these policies of the Great Society, quote unquote, was, you guessed it, Lyndon B. Johnson. Surprised? He carried this out through the War on Poverty agenda. Activist Sergeant Shriver and a team of child development experts launched Project Head Start. In 1965, education reform was also a key part of the Great Society. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed. This guaranteed funding for education in school districts where students who are of low income were provided funded preschool programs, supported school libraries, school textbooks, and special education services. The ideology of the Great Society was eventually viewed by most as government handouts and felt government should stay out of Americans' lives altogether. I agree. I've come to the realization that these social safety nets do more harm than good because it limits American families trying to get out of the poverty line. I view this Great Society as a pacifier to cover up the Vietnam War. If you didn't know, when President Lyndon B. Johnson was in office, you know, when he took office, there was only 16,000 soldiers as recorded in the Vietnam War. By the time he left office, it was 500,000. So you can understand why Americans was upset. But continuing on here, that kind of shows you what was in his heart, why he was pioneering the Civil Rights Act and all this American equality and stuff like that. You got American soldiers dying in the war. And you know, when certain people in office, they like to keep wars going on because it makes money and gives them control over things like that. So it just kind of is contradictory that by the time he left office, there were way more soldiers over there dying and coming back messed up to cripple America even further and crippling a man in a house to really lead his house well. Think about that, you guys. Finally! Did we really land on the moon? Or was the government testing to see if we would believe them or not for years to come? Remember, TV became popular in the 1960s. NASA was founded in 1958 near the end of President Dwight Eisenhower's tenure. It was reported that on July 20th, 1969, that the first man landed on the moon. With more than 1/2 billion people watching. Yes, you heard me. 1/2 billion people watching through means of television stations. As a majority, the program was named after President Lyndon B. Johnson. Even though JFK had the vision to land man on the moon before the decade was out, JFK wasn't really interested in space exploration, but instead winning the Cold War. LBJ was a space fanatic. LBJ stated, "Control of space is control of the world." I find the photos of the landing on the moon to be inconsistent and suspect. If you view the photos, stars are not there, they barely visible, and it seems like the lighting treatment similar to Photoshop is implemented. I believe the government uses to hoodwink us all. If you pay attention, the media made this broadcast so important that again, 1/2 billion people witnessed it. I believe this experiment was precedent to deceive the masses into believing whatever the media presents to them. Ponder on this. It was reported that the moon dirt smelled like wet fireplace ashes or fireworks after it was used. But mysteriously, when the material was brought back to Earth, the smell was not traceable at all. They say the smell of the moon stayed on the moon. And then NASA in a geological survey even blasted out craters at Cinder Lake, Arizona to simulate a surface that mimicked the moon's. And another interesting thing to note, President Nixon, who was in office after LBJ, spoke to the astronauts via telephone from Houston. How was that even possible? But then again, thank y'all for tuning in to another episode of Supernova 25. Thank you, and thank God you alive. And we out.